Let me begin with an irreverent thought. Yesterday, after boarding my flight to come over here to Europe, and after getting settled nicely in the seat of my plane, a video flashed on the monitor before me. It's the video you're all very accustomed to, where the airline explains to you how you ought to buckle your seatbelt, what you should do in case of an emergency, in case of a water mapping. But before all this brief informational material was presented to me, there was a promotion for the value of travel. And the thesis went something like this: travel, because by discovering other cultures, you discover something about yourself. So this was my irreverent thought. We in the humanities make precisely the same argument for our existence in the university today. Could we do more? Could we do better? Most outsiders to our industry, the industry of higher education, have argued that we are in a state of disruption, that there are some really big changes that need to happen in the university if we're going to have a flourishing future. Financial problems. Our revenues are flat, but the costs for delivering an education are growing. There is an increasing disconnect between what our universities are doing and what the global workplace is demanding. I think the most recent stat I saw suggested that most graduates will change their jobs between 6 and 8 times in their life, and that many of them will pursue multiple different careers. So long gone are the days when you graduate from college, you start working for a company, and 40 years later you retire with a party and a gold watch. That's over. So how are our universities adjusting to this new workplace reality? Arguably, the greatest crisis that we're facing is a crisis of vision. Most of us are experts in religion, and we know that every single religious tradition has a vision of human flourishing, and most of them have multiple visions of human flourishing. What are we doing to help our students answer the question, what is the good life? What sorts of ideas should I be endorsing? What sorts of practices should I be cultivating? Rituals participating in? What sorts of mindsets, inter and interpersonal competencies should I be developing? These are the questions that our students are asking, and these are the questions that we in the humanities are particularly equipped to answer. These musings set the stage for the conversation we're going to have this morning. The questions, as you can see in your program, are all animated by this larger question: what is the future of the humanities in the university of the 21st century? These are some of the most important questions we're asking. They're not the only ones, but we thought that we would use these to set the stage for a wider conversation. So the format that we are going to use is something like this. We're going to talk about each issue on its own. The panelists will get an opportunity to share their thoughts, and then we will open it up to you in the room to add your own contributions. And then we will move to the next question, and then the third, and then the fourth. And by that time, we will have earned our coffee break. Are there any questions before we proceed? Any questions from the panelists? Anything I can clarify? All right, then why don't we begin? My suggestion is that we do a very brief round of introductions. I think most of us know each other, but in case someone does not know a panelist. So we'll begin at the end with Valeria, and then I will start us off with our first question. Thank you.
So hello, I am Valeria Desi. I'm working at Aarhus University, and I'm an ESR working inside this project. And yeah, I am here to give my contribution as a ESR working here.
Hello, my name is Ben Ryan. I'm the head of research for Theos. Theos is a think tank which works on the intersection of religion and society, and a particular focus on European politics in my case.
My name is Carla Pullman. I'm Professor of Classics and Theology, and I'm the Dean of the Faculty of Arts at the University of Bristol in the United Kingdom, still in Europe.
Hello, my name is Izzy Schneider. I had a pleasure and honor to talk to you last night. I'm Executive Director of Aspen Institute Centre Europe, which is a part of Aspen Institutes around the world. My career reflects what you just said. Very, very different jobs, so probably I will talk from that perspective, which is in line of the mission of the Aspen Institute, which brings together people from various backgrounds together and trying to find a common ground, which, by the way, should be a task of universities as well.
I'm Anders Christian Jacobsen. I'm professor of theology at Aarhus University, and I'm coordinating this project on human freedom and dignity as a reception project of Origins, ideas of human freedom and dignity. So I have followed this project for a number of years also before it started in reality. So.
I am Sara Contini. I am an early stage researcher in this project, and I am a PhD of Classics at the University of Bristol.
And I'm Peter Martins, Professor of Early Christianity at St. Louis University, and I'm a member of the Scientific Advisory Board for this project. All right, welcome once again. The first question that we have on our program is like this. How do we assert the relevance of the arts and humanities in a disruptive world? How do we assert the relevance of the arts and humanities in a disruptive world? I'll open it up to the panelists.
Always getting first. That's fine. I was reminded when I saw this question, the quotation which came to mind was Jonathan Sacks, who's the chief rabbi in Britain and Ireland for many years, has this line that the solution to bad religion is not no religion but good religion, by which his kind of thesis is when you see religion being misused for violent or sinister purposes, the solution to that is not to drive it out completely but to replace it with good informed stuff. And I think you can make that case more broadly. I would also add that the solution to bad history is not no history but good history. When I look around, and I work in kind of the intersection of the arts and politics, I see an awful lot of bad religion and bad history. And I don't just mean incompetent, I mean malicious and sinister, like deliberate abuses of history and religion in order to serve political purposes which I would say are antithetical to that Christian past. I think, unfortunately, this makes me a very bad guess. The government in this country is guilty of that in extreme, of claiming a kind of Christian motifs for policies and principles which I think are fundamentally opposed to the history of Christian democracy on which they're drawing. So the solution to that bad history, that bad religion, is for people who actually have a deeply informed sense of the arts and history to stand up and challenge some of those more effectively. And that is where I would see at the moment a particular point of need in a climate in which vast numbers of political parties are springing up, fully happy to abuse a Christian history. But those who actually are theologians and historians need to stand up and counter that with good history and good theology.
Yeah, my first comment to that is around the claim that the world is disruptive. I think that's true in many ways, but it probably always was more like this also. So I think that humanities in our situation should also still contribute to disruptions, because that's one of our tasks as academics, to question how things are. So disruption is not only a bad thing, I would say, but of course disruption can be too much also, and then in these cases the role of humanities could also be to identify false disruptions, false claims based on some unsubstantiated claims about, for example, certain traditions being suppressing and so on. For example, certain religious traditions being as such violent and so on. We have to go deeper in to that, and I think that connects well to what you said, Ben, about good and bad religions. We should not be afraid of also identifying religion or historical interpretations that are unprecise and false, so to say. We have now maybe too big a fear to be normative, also to say, to identify good and bad in what we are doing. We cannot always be neutral.
I would say that the role of the humanities is what it has always been, to preserve our collective identity and memory, so that if we think that the future is uncertain, we can at least be rooted in our past and do not end up as an amnesiac people. So I would say that the role of the humanities is to, through school and through university, preserve a memory of the history of human thought and of human storytelling.
Yeah, if I may, yesterday we heard in our fantastic introductory lecture that values are a crucial foundation for a successful operation of a community, and it is something that political states themselves cannot create out of their own political systems. And I see the role of the arts and humanities certainly as a space where these values can be renegotiated and retold. So there is not only a critical, if you like, disruptive and deconstructive role to the arts and humanities, but also a productive, proactive and creative role, that we reproduce or produce narratives that communicate these values.
So when I hear these answers to the question, how to assert the relevance of the arts and humanities in a disruptive world, I find myself in agreement. But I think the insinuation in this question is that for many people today in the university and in our larger society, the arts and humanities are not relevant. So how can we address this question? Because I think we're preaching to the choir right now. We're convinced that we matter, and we think we have arguments for why we matter. Why are we perceived as not being important and worthy of investment? I can only speak out of my own context and my own situation. But in our American universities, the humanities are rapidly being downsized. So lines are not being renewed. We have core curricula. I don't know if you have this. This is very common in Europe, but in an American undergraduate education, you have to take a certain amount of hours from a number of classes so that we can all say that you are a well-rounded individual. The core curriculum at most universities has shrunk from 60 credit hours to about 30 credit hours, and those 30 credit hours often only have 2 or 3 humanities courses in them. So if I were in a university setting, sitting with scientists, social scientists, folks from law and business, I'm not convinced that they're convinced we matter. So if I can put an edge on this question, and maybe this is a way to open it up for the audience, why is it that many people outside of our fields think we don't matter? Because I think that's where the argument is.
If I may, I was yesterday referring that I was trying in my education to do both mathematics, natural science, and humanities. I compare it to 2 hemispheres, and I think one of the deficiencies of you inside your world of humanities is that you, for some reasons, are not able to prove your competencies you've gained in your field relevant to other fields, to education, to teachers, to managers, to counselors, because your competencies you've gained from your study, your specific study, critical thinking, accumulated wisdom of humankind in certain fields, are absolutely useful for practitioners in many other fields. And maybe they will bring them the missing element for their understanding. I'll give you an example. If you are, whatever your education is, in certain point you get to the leading position. You become a dean. And I'm looking at Jared. And suddenly you have to deal with things you've never, you were not trained to do. So you're seeking for someone who has the competences you need. It's about lifelong, learning. So I would encourage to show how useful is the ability of dozens of years of studying of Origin or Aristotle or Shakespeare to fields where you never thought it's applicable for them. But if I would be only an engineer, capable of doing many things, some of you are not able to, trained to it. In certain point, I'm seeking for an understanding or a competencies which the people from other fields are able to provide to me. So I think you should be able to show the relevance, because the humanities are relevant to every single person. It's just about to find a common ground for that. And of course it's applicable in the universities, but I would argue that the key doesn't lie in the universities, but the key is in those who are the customers of universities. So for example, the practitioners, the managers of companies who support the university, because they are shaping the curricula. They are saying we don't need humanities in the core curriculum. Yeah. But if they will say we need core humanities in the core curricula, because I think in the end the graduates of the university, whatever is the area of their study, will need some kind of competences in humanities. This might change. And if you are able to find a desperate manager who is seeking to understand the secrets of the human soul, because he is struggling with his subordinates, with his team, trying to understand what the other people think, what are their motivations, and he suddenly has to study something which is very, very basic. And what he usually does, he buys a cheap book, Idiot's Guide to whatever, and he doesn't draw on a real, I would say, expertise. So I hope I was clear in my argument. So the solution is not inside the university to convince your colleagues from the other branches that you're relevant, but it's from the society. It should be a demand of the society. Humanities are relevant because they help to be better society in our jobs, in our communities, whatever. So they are key for education from not just for university, but for the education of young people.
Wonderful. I think Valeria wants to jump in.
Yeah, because I have a question, an answer for you, and also it's very connected with what you were saying, because I've been confronting myself a lot with PhDs working specifically in physics, actually. And many times the question was, but why are you doing this? We cannot see a practicality of these things, something practical, a kind of relevance from what you're doing. And from one side, maybe it's me, but I've been thinking a lot about maybe we are really doing something that is not useful, and it's a bit inferior to sciences, which is useful, which provides some progress to societies. No? But from the other side, so it's true that sometimes there is a lack from humanities to try to make relevant what we are doing, try to explain why it makes sense to study late antiquity today, for example, which is not something just for libraries, but it's something that can have relevance because religion is something that is important for all of us in the society. But from the other side, I think that there's probably a lack of interdisciplinarity at universities because people studying physics, maths, and other scientific disciplines sometimes are very narrow. Maybe they have a lack of consciousness of what they are studying, the development maybe of what they are studying, the history of the discipline, how it changed, you know. And sometimes as a person studying philosophy, I felt like maybe I had some intuitions that I wanted to share, but it was like difficult to find a kind of common point, you know. So yeah, maybe a kind of more interdisciplinary approach might function better in some cases.
Anders, did you want to add something?
Yeah. I agree to in the question, but only to a certain degree, because I do not think that people outside humanities always regard us as irrelevant. I think we often regard ourselves as irrelevant to the society, and we fear that we are not relevant, and we do not really dare to step out of our comfort zone to address questions in contemporary society, because we want to be sure that we can argue and we can demonstrate that it's correct. We only, for example, want to say what happened in the 2nd and the 3rd century with Origen. We don't really want to say what does that mean for us, because then we consider ourselves to be outside our competences and so on. I experienced actually a lot of interest for humanities and what I'm doing myself and for the project and so on. Just before coming here, I lectured on Augustine's philosophy and theology for 130 people who even paid to, not because of me, but because it was a larger row of lectures on philosophy from Plato to modern times, and people are really eager to learn about these things. I think we have to be more confident that we can contribute. And in our time, we're dominated by a lot of what we call fake news. We need to be able to also distinguish about what's good and bad and contribute to distinguish between that. We cannot just hide behind facts that we can read in our old books, but we have to make judgments also to be a bit normative, to be relevant. But so I think a big hurdle is with ourselves, and not so much also that, but not so much people from outside humanities. I also see many of the theologians get jobs in companies and in many other places. They ask for these people because they have some competences which are really attractive to society. So I think we have to be more confident in what we can do.
Ben?
I think there's a question of the metrics for relevance here, which is that most of the metrics for when you see kind of your league tables of universities are designed by social scientists or are aimed at the sciences. And if you're trying to compete in a league table as the humanities against a system which is designed by social scientists in order to measure the impact of social sciences, you're going to lose. So change the metrics. It would be the kind of obvious thing. And I think that gets towards, and as Christian's point, is precisely that I work in a think tank which is trying to do kind of theology and the humanities, but in a political space, and I don't see a huge lack of demand for the arts and humanities in public and political life. In fact, quite the opposite. I think there's quite a demand for it, but there is a question about how you there's not a demand problem, there may be a supply problem. There may be an issue for thinking how can humanities actually go out and reach some of these people, but a friend of mine who's a philosopher for the Church of England just got put on a funding bid at Bath University looking at AI. And it's a hilarious list of partners because IBM, Google and the Church of England are the 3 listed partners for the department. But the reason for that is that he's an ethicist. And he met someone at a conference and they said, well, actually, we haven't thought about any of these questions. That does seem quite relevant. And would you like to be on the bid and you can be involved in it? Yes, and he's there. But it involves actually kind of changing some of the ways in which that operating and going out. And similarly, I know there's a Catholic theologian who teaches a course to British parliamentarians on political philosophy and theology. It's a kind of not secret, but they don't kind of publish what goes on, but basically she just takes them through a kind of history of political theology and philosophy. It's really well attended. There's 100 people that go to some of those classes. I don't think there's a demand problem. There is an issue about how you calculate how you best meet that supply side of the equation and how you can change the metrics to suggest that that is a kind of relevant form of impact, not just the ones which are used in the social sciences.
Good. Are there other observations or questions from the room about this issue that we're discussing, the relevance or lack thereof of the humanities in today's university and society? Alphonse. Thank you, Carl.
Just to add 2 thoughts on what I experience or what I see. Well, first from our side. I think it depends a little bit what our focus is. So if we want to change the matrix. Sometimes I have the feeling in my circumstances that we ourselves are focused too much on details and going in many, many details of our field of research and so on. And then it ends up in a discussion among experts, which is very close to applied science. And now don't be worried about PhD theses so on, because obviously you have to start at a certain point and to read and deal with the details. But in the end, I think when we talk about relevance, then it's also up to us to detect what are the important questions, how to frame it, in which framework do I propose what I'm doing. Because even when I was a young student, I didn't even know that a guide like Origin exists. I never had the idea that I will end up where I am now. So it's so far away, in some sense, from real or usual life experience, that I think from our side it's important not only to sway or to talk about its relevant, but really to focus, in which sense, what is the framework of our thinking. So what I would call in the German word Bildung, or literacy, or something like that, to keep this idea up, even if it might sound old-fashioned. And that's my other thought from the other side, what I experience in my university or in educational fields in general. There is a dominant mindset, I think, in our times. And this mindset is pretty much shaped along lines of quantifying things to measure the relevance, and even of monetarian ideas behind. So it's very driven by how to make money or what else. So what do we think about when we speak about relevance? And this might be connected to keep up a certain idea of literacy building, and it's our task then to shape our field and our research and our teaching in a way that it can really be connected to the world outside. So it's more in your direction, I understand, because I also see that people are interested in it, but then you have to adjust to this. You cannot simply go back in your comfort zone and so, I have to write 10 articles about the date of this treatise. Mention one example.
But can I give it just a short reply to that? I think both sides is very important, because if you do not write the books or the 10 or 20 articles, you will not be able to explain things in a way which is relevant. So you have that's a hard thing to be in humanities. You have to study hard, but you also have to then afterwards transform it into a form that is relevant to non-academics. That's a difficult thing. You have to do both.
I fully agree that it is our responsibility to find a way to communicate that is relevant, because I agree that there is a demand for our knowledge. For example, the many PhDs of classics at the University of Bristol often go to schools, to kids aged like 12 or 13, and these kids show a lot of enthusiasm towards what the PhDs suggest about mythology, about epic. So it is a challenge for us in the university to find a way to communicate things that are interesting and people are interested in them in a way that comes from our scholarly work, but then it is mediated for the public of the schools, I believe. So there can be a cooperation between university teachers and school teachers to do precisely that. So we can produce a certain knowledge, and school teachers can re-elaborate and find ways to communicate this knowledge. With our cooperation, we can go into the schools, and I really believe that the schools are the way for us to preserve our knowledge and to meet the interest of outside the academia. Thank you.
Lorenzo.
I would not be so pessimist about the relevance of arts and humanities in our world, as I don't understand fully what you mean by disruptive world. In a way, it is a word which is not so disruptive, but is a globalized world, so it's for me not the same thing as a disruptive world. But there are many aspects that one should take into account. For instance, national situations are, despite the globalized world, different. If you have half of the PhD students in this project who are Italians, there is a reason. There is an institutional process of formation in the schools and in the university which produces scholars, researchers which are apt to enter into a European project. But this is precisely the problem we have at the moment in Italy. On the one hand, we had so far a school, the gymnasium, which was working very well for classics, for humanities. Nowadays, of course, we encounter difficulties. There has been a debate about history. History has been taken out. It was not anymore considered for the matura, you say, before entering the university. So history is evaluated. And this created a great debate about the role of history in Italian situation, Italian culture, which is fundamental. On the other hand, there is certainly a need for humanities in the mass culture. We have a society in which leisure is more and more. Of course, this is for the senior period, for senior ages, but exhibitions and cultural events are demanding a lot of investment for humanities and arts. Cultural industry works very well in our countries. You have exhibitions which are so we have a setting which is not so unfavorable for the role of arts and humanities. On the other hand, I don't see a substantial difference as far as the classical debate about the two cultures is concerned. Snow and scientific and humanistic culture. The problem is the resources, the finances, the academic power in the university, so to what extent you reach, and in this sense, for Europeans, the European Union has helped humanities in considerable way. We are an example of the humanities finance supported by the European community. Finally, I wonder whether, apart from all the observations which you have made about the relevance or not of humanities in our society, whether the ethos of Max Weber, Wissenschaft als Beruf, still the ethos of a researcher should be the ethos of the researcher. So when you concentrate on research apart from your eventual relevance for society or not, there is an aesthetic, there is an ethos of engagement into research, and your own salvation depends on this research, according to Max Weber. I don't know whether it is still actual. For me, it is still actual.
Thank you. Well, one of the themes that runs through a number of these responses, especially the ones that came in later, well, actually almost all of them, is the boundaries that we have put up between ourselves and others. So between ourselves and society. Are we reaching out to people outside of the university? The boundaries we put up between ourselves and other departments. And I'm also reminded, as some of you were talking about, figuring out how to share our results with the wider public, that scientists often undergo training for writing, for communicating the results for popular audiences. There are all sorts of courses for scientists that are designed to help them write for wider audiences. And one wonders if this is something that needs to also happen for those of us in the humanities. On this issue of boundaries and silos, I'm going to jump to the fourth question, because it addresses this. How to organize successful inter and multidisciplinarity in challenge-led research clusters. This also challenges, I think, the ethos by which we work. Most of us in the humanities tend to work in isolation. This is how we are formed in the field. Go write your dissertation in that cubicle. Come out in 3 years and defend it. And yet we are seeing a trend toward funding projects precisely like this. So how do we think about this question of inter and multidisciplinarity in our fields? Challenges to it, values behind this kind of work? Please.
In the presentation that I prepared for today, I will speak about a project that, according to me, represents a good example of what a research group should have. And in my opinion, this should be interdisciplinarity, international cooperation, and the objective to create something that is open access. And this project is the Digital Corpus of Literary Papyri, which has the objective of creating a easily searchable and comprehensive database. And I think this is a good example because it is an international project made of, I think, the US, Germany, the Netherlands, Italy, and others. And it is made so that everyone who knows the language, the markup language, can contribute with their own edition of the papyri, and it's submitted to the scholarly board. So I feel that this gives us an occasion to speak about the things that, for me, make a successful project, which are, as I was saying, international cooperation, etc.
Thank you. Harlan.
Yeah, thank you. Just to confirm that, there's nothing wrong with lone scholarship in the sense that we all have to engage with something in a competent and professional way. But there has to be this second element to our education, that we are able to communicate what we are doing beyond our own in-group. And I think that should be an integral part of every PhD student and maybe even undergraduate from now on. I think that's extremely important. And I think times are working for us insofar as the digital world gives us a lot of information. I mean, if you have an illness, for instance, you go into the internet, you can read up on it. You can go to YouTube, you can find very interesting lectures about anything in the planet. So you have to learn how to understand these things and how to judge whether that's a fake news or something truthful. So the communicative competence in a world that offers a lot of information in a decontextualized way needs to be a capability we need all to be able to deliver. And the shift to solve challenges we understand, be it migration or environment or the digital world as a transforming our sense of community, are things where all disciplines are bidden to contribute. So I just wanted to confirm very strongly what has just been said.
I have a research team of 7, and 3 of them have PhDs, and all of them had the same problem, which is it took me 3 months to break them, because we do an exercise which is 7 words. When you pitch a long read to a journalist, you have to have a 7 to 10 word pitch. That's all you get. And they don't care about 92% of what you've written. That's not specific to your research, it's any research, that's scientific research as well. And you just have to pick the most impactful 7 words. It's not even necessarily the key part of the thesis, it's just a part which is going to be newsworthy. Honestly, this takes people months. It's probably the most difficult thing about managing people with PhDs. It's so difficult to get them to distill a thing into 7 words. And that's all you get. And so we send people on media courses and we work with them in all sorts of ways to try and kind of breach that gap. But I think I'm seeing a lot of universities begin to outsource that comms bit to think tanks. When we started in 2006, academics probably rightly looked down on us as being kind of an inferior form of research, and that's probably true. Now I spend a good day a week turning away academic departments which need someone to do the impact part on their funding proposal, by which they mean comms and media. And I think that's one model. You can just keep outsourcing it, but it's not a sustainable long-term one. So I think that kind of basic training thing is not difficult to do. There's millions of courses out there to do it, but build it into the process right from the beginning.
Please.
On one hand, I agree, because I know this pressure of simplifying things. If you dislike that this is for media, for journalists, just ask yourself, are you able to explain the 6-year-old kid of yours what you're doing? I think that's a very, very simple test of whether you are able to put in very simple words what do you spend your time on. And it very much depends whether you consider yourself and your work relevant. That's what you said. If you consider what you're doing relevant, then you're able to find even 7 words after 7 struggle to explain what is that. Now, on the other hand, I would argue that the role of humanities is to resist this pressure of time and simplification, and simply to say there are things under the sun which deserve more than 7 words, which deserve more than 30 seconds in media, which deserve a kind of long-term debate, contemplation, thinking. There is not only fast food, there is also slow food. And this is resisting this kind of disruptive speeding up of the world. The world is disruptive because, just take the technologies. Every second year you have to, the new versions of software. Aren't you struggling with it all the time? and we are on the upper level of the society. Imagine what it is for those less educated to cope with the technological changes. So this is disruption, and because of that, they're losing their jobs, because their jobs are going to be done in a different way, and so that's the disruption, so in a certain way, humanities should be disruptive to disrupt the simplifying misuse of history, religion, whatever, the simplification, to disrupt them. On the other hand, you should be able to calm down or to heal this wound of being constantly disrupted by these changes, because some things are not changing. And one thing which troubles me is that in technology, if you talk to the technical people, that before they graduate from the technical university, there are completely new technologies already. Yeah, so they're dealing with this but the human nature is not changing, and yeah. So how you're probably aware about the so-called Moore law, that in every 18 months the speed of the processors is actually doubling, so it's exponential. Yeah. Now we're talking about the quantum computers, which are incredibly capable. So it's going like this. It's not straight, but it's going like this. But our brain is not going like this. And that's the disruption. And so how to actually accommodate to these changes? I think you have to be able to tell this is not the first time, this is not a unique situation in the history of humankind. There have been some situations like that. And maybe it's time to stop for a moment and to think about some core issues which are basically in the how to call it, the knowledge base of or information base of humankind. My last point is all the information is available. Many things are available, but who knows what is relevant from that information? And so that's the role of education. That's the role of humanities too. There are methods to find out what's trash, what's fake, what's completely misleading, and what are the core messages you're finding. One doctor has in his waiting room a kind of announcement: if you have consulted already Google about your illness, you don't need me. Yeah, because I think that's exactly about that. If you're a patient, you go for Google and you find, exactly your diagnosis, and you come to the doctor and you say, this is my diagnosis, and I fully understand the doctor who says, okay, come next time and don't read this, because this is about sorting out the relevance of information, and this cannot be done by any algorithms. There has to be human agency in that, sorting out what is relevant and what is not. It's not just putting all the information in the one big, I was referring to yesterday to big data, and then suddenly you got from this black box a kind of divine wisdom. No, this is not how it works. So showing relevant information, being able to tell what are the relevant information in all this information mess around us is the role for humanities.
Yeah, if I can just add, so anecdotally, trying to connect to this point. I distinctly recall encyclopedia salespeople coming to my home when I was growing up, selling encyclopedias. This was precious. It could be sold.
Yeah.
Information could be sold. And you fast forward now, 30, 35 years later, and information is there and it's free. That's not what's valuable anymore. What's valuable is vision. What matters? And that's where students, I think, are struggling. We're not living in an age where people need to find stuff. That's easy to find. Encyclopedias are free. Not big data is available everywhere. But how do you assess it? What is important? What matters? What shapes how we live a life?
Yeah, this is a big different perspective on this with challenge-led research in the fourth paragraph. We are there now, Peter?
In theory, we are there, yes.
In theory, we are there.
Please take us there.
Okay. It's a bit technical, but I think that's also important for us. And coming out of such being in such a European project as we are now, you probably know that much of the research supported by the European Union are so-called challenge-led research, meaning that the EU identifies the most important challenges in society, and they put up themes where these researchers can respond to immigration, secure societies, and a lot of this stuff. And often people from humanities say that that's not really for us, we do not fit in, what can we contribute with there. My first point is that if you look closely at it, in many of these challenges, humanities are very important. For example, secure societies. What does it mean to be secure in your society? Is it just that we do not have terrorist attacks? Yeah, maybe, but it's also why do we have terrorist attacks and what produces terrorists? There we already are approaching religion, for example. So I think humanities can answer to many of these most important challenges in society. But adding to that, then you could ask, or should ask, who define these challenges? It's the European Union, but the European Union is not like a secret society somewhere. European Union is us, and how is these challenges formulated? By asking scholars and others, what do you see as being the challenges of society? So if we want, we are invited into being those who formulate what is the challenges of contemporary society. So I think that's also a role we should take on us to contribute to identify challenges and define them. And there, of course, we have much to contribute with already in defining what is the big challenges in society. And when we define such challenges, for example, again, like secure societies, it becomes clear that you cannot answer it on your own. You have to work in interdisciplinary clusters, as you say, and Valeria and Sarah already touched on that. So you have to learn to see what parts of these big challenges can you contribute with, and who do you need to work with if you should give a more broad answer to the questions. You have to work with scientists, maybe sociologists, all kinds of other people. And if you just say, I can myself contribute with this little part, and then you can take it or leave it, that's not good enough. You have to explain how your contribution works with other aspects of these challenges. So this is an interdisciplinary part of it. Yeah, this was a bit technical, but I think it's important for us to know also the possibilities.
I would turn it the other way around. Why not you be those who will be formulating the most critical challenges? Not just waiting for others to formulate the question and then say, maybe I have this tiny contribution to the solution. I mean, isn't it that the humanities should be, having this ambition to say, maybe the most relevant question is not the secure society, and maybe it's a different question. And so there's a very strong power in power of word. And if you're able to formulate, then you're actually in the leading position, and you're shaping the discussion by the question. And maybe that's for me, it's one of the biggest things I've learned from humanities. That the biggest thing is to ask the proper question. So isn't it a role for you to ask the proper question? And then invite others to debate about the answer.
Are there any folks in the audience that would like to contribute to this question? Please.
Just a short remark, which is also linked to the former question. I think that it's very okay. I think that we have to distinguish on one side what we are doing, so our specific research, and of course we can try to communicate it to other people, and we can use the media, we can use YouTube, we can do videos just to spread it to a broader audience. But we cannot, we cannot just simplify it. Of course, we can reach a broader audience, but we have to keep the richness, the deep of our research. Otherwise, sometimes there are I watch videos on YouTube about philosophy explanation of some philosopher in 5 minutes. And where people just give a lot of information which are very, very general. And what do you get? What other people get from these kind of videos? And what does this can bring more to other people? Just some maybe data, just some information, but people are not able to use and to think with this. So I think that we. Our first duty is not just to simplify what we are doing. We are a researcher, and in comparison to other people, we are able just to analyze, to go into deep in some points. If we think about more natural sciences, of course they cannot just explain a new theory to a broader audience, because there is so much behind this theory which a normal audience cannot get it. So I think the point is not just to get to the other people, to communicate to other people, because this is what we are doing is something very specific for us that we study. We are studying this, and of course just a small part of people can really get it, can really understand this. But on the other side, what we can bring to other people is are some skills like Humanities, which we can get through our studies. This means a capacity of analyzing problems, a capacity of analyzing situation, of seeing which is the main point, which is relevant and not irrelevant, the capacity of communicating it to other people. Sometimes, for example, people who studies, physics or engineering are not able to communicate to other people because they just work with the number and with the formulations, and they are not able to speak to other people. And so we have these skills that we learn, and I think that these are the most relevant point for our society, and I think that we have to be able also to communicate it to the society, that to show to the society that we get these abilities through our studies.
Yeah. Well, and one of the skills that was in theory cultivated and developed in this particular project was the capacity to work in teams, which is not a usual skill that is developed in the humanities. Most people who earn PhDs in our fields do not work in teams the way you have. And I think that was one of the points that this fourth bullet point was getting at, is sort of the challenges of working together in teams. And I'm still hoping to hear more from you about that. I don't know, Johannes, are you going to go in this direction, or?
Yeah, maybe.
All right.
No, I mean, I think one of the most interesting developments in the last decades in technology, at least, is decentralization in software, but also I think in all sciences we can see that. And I think as being all postmodern, we know very well that the discourse itself does not have a center, and although there might be some nodal points trying to fix the sliding of meaning, the continuous sliding of meaning, there is not necessarily, unless we talk about ideology, a center that makes everything consistent and that takes away all contradictions. And I think this maybe speaks to this, that we sometimes think maybe as individuals that we are that center, creating that meaning, creating that consistency. And maybe if you decentralize that, embrace that decentralization, also the speed in which things go nowadays is not so scary. I think this is a classical experience also people that have experienced the speeds later on. I mean, if I see my nephews and also in our generation, maybe we are not so impressed by how things develop. So in that sense, if we take ourselves out of that central point that needs to create this consistency, maybe this speaks a little bit about community and about how people work in groups and not take themselves as.
Thank you. So I am conscious of the time, and I know that I promised a break, but so I think we should try to discuss, if we can, one more topic, and then we will take a break, and then after the break, I think we'll hear the two presentations. The question here that strikes me as punchy and provocative is the question, what is progress in the arts and humanities? And I would add, does it matter? Or maybe, how do we measure progress? I think that's all implied. But what is progress in the arts and humanities?
Yeah, this question actually comes from me, I have to confess that. And it stems from a time when I was in St. Andrews, and I was often sitting on appointment committees in theology, and they were chaired by the Pro-Vice Chancellor, who was a chemist. And we interviewed all these terribly learned theologians, and I was completely into this and asked lots of subtle questions, and then came the chemist, Pro-Vice Chancellor, and said, I could tell you what progress is in my discipline, i.e. in chemistry. Can you, as a theologian, explain to me, what is progress in your discipline? And this question just blew me. And I have, for the last 20 years, tried to think, what is progress? In particular, if we think progress is something linear. Of course, the Christians, we think that, as the Greeks have more circular, you create a world and then it combusts and you create another one. They have a more cyclical way of understanding things. Whereas Christianity, Augustine would say there are these two cities and they move forward in history until their abit finis, their destined ends. But of course, beyond that, progress is very difficult because Augustine would not necessarily say the world gets better or worse or anything, but you just have these two cities just in constant struggle against each other. And so that was why I wanted to pose this question to an audience with you professionally, as it were, deals with the disciplines that are affected by this question. One simple progress could be if we learn to work in teams. For instance, 1611, the King James Bible was produced by 60 translators, and by the way, there were hard-nosed businessmen among them, speaking of money, etc. So even that is not so much progress, but we had this before, as it were. Or that progress is that we can communicate to a wider audience now. The church fathers, of course, were desperate to do that. In their sermons, they try to communicate things, partly at least, to a wider audience, and that was a revolution because the pagans, in their, if you like, sacrificial rituals, didn't have that.
Lorenzo.
I do not pretend to answer this big question, but at least we are all researchers. We have to present now and then a state of art. A state of art means what has been done in our field of studies and what could be done in the future. So in a way, we can measure what has been done and we can expect results for the future. So if you would ask me what is the state for an author like Origin and Augustine, I would say, well, translations are needed. There are now critical editions of text which were not edited so far. Now we complete the critical editions. We make new editions, new translation, studies of aspects, themes which are important or not important. So this is the progress in my eyes of studies. So we have a rather banal and concrete answer, perhaps. It's trivial, but in a way we always proceed with the idea of this progress of sciences.
Coming back, thank you, Lorenzo. Is the challenge in the scientist's question the insinuation that what we do in the humanities is we debate with one another and we go back and forth, whereas in the sciences the idea is that we're constantly producing knowledge that is useful and is explaining more and more of the world. And then I'm trying to figure out what's tricky about that question for a theologian or a historian, because Lorenzo's response seems very straightforward and plausible to me. Well, a new edition has been created. There was not one before, now we have one. Why does that not count as progress? Okay, so, Elena.
And then Valeria. No, Elena first.
I will be brief. This is a tricky question in a way because it's a bad question in my eyes. And I explain myself. Progress is a misleading, in a way, is a misleading word. It means when progress started, the concept of progress during the 17th century with the Enlightenment and the idea of movement of knowledge not as a package of knowledge, fixed perfection, to preserve, to be preserved and to be communicated, but something in movement. And it was science, the sciences, physics, astronomy, etc., which leads this way of progressing, not literature, not etc. They were the keeper, humanities are normally the keeper. This is why it's a bit misleading, and we can compare, in a way, the idea of progress in chemistry or in medicine supposed to change the quality of life of people. And we are not supposed normally to change life of people with our studies. This is why we should explain what progress could really mean for humanities. And I think that Lorenzo gave a good answer in a way, saying more translation, more reliable translation, etc., etc. But on the other hand, related to the first question and the fourth question, because all the questions are related together, it's not enough to say that progress is to have more translations, etc., etc. And the background question, in my opinion, is: are we scholars, simply scholars, or we should be also intellectuals? What is the role of the intellectual today? If I can say I'm a good or bad scholar, it means in my research field I can just discover something new, etc., etc. But this is not so important for the society. Maybe we are called to be something more than good scholars in our research field, and to be intellectual.
Sorry.
And sorry, can I just butt in there, because I think I like that distinction. As of course, as a discipline, we can define what we mean by progress inside, but I like the way you write this. And one of the problems we have, I think, still, is, let's say, if someone is ill. There was a time when a theologian would have said, you are ill because you have done something bad, and this is the punishment of God. And then comes medicine and says, no, actually, it's bacteria. And that was seen as progress, because it freed people from a sort of hard-to-control outside force, and as we are basically all guilty, you could ask, why are we not all equally ill, etc., etc. And I think that's a bit why we have the problems we have, that we are perceived as sometimes misusing certain, if you like, power indicators. So that was just, thank you. I think what you ask is precisely how we have to move this forward, because now we could say, maybe now the natural sciences abuse their authority, or technology abuses it and says, well, we have to have progress, more computers, bigger computers, all resources going to that for the sake of it. Yeah, so it could flip the other way around. So thank you.
Sorry.
Thank you. Actually, it's very much connected with what you said, because what I want to say, because it's a very practical example from my limited experience as PhD. And I also ask myself, where is progress in what I'm doing, so more philosophy or theology, history of ideas, because of course the last translation I made was like 10 years ago, so I cannot obviously contribute to the field of philology. But I was thinking about it while approaching some text on, for example, history of Protestantism, history of the church, and maybe some observation from some other colleagues or professors, scholars would be that this book is very old style. It presents problems in a very way which has been like overcome. So it's not the way we are talking about these problems anymore. So I think that maybe a way to talk about progress in history of ideas or philosophy is also how we approach problems. The way we approach problems change while time goes by. So at the end, this is also what we find in scholar textbook, for example. The way what students are studying at school, text, history text, I'm thinking about it, or text for studying philosophy, is the result at the end. One of the results of our bringing progress to the study of history and philosophy, for example.
So on this, and then we're going to move it over there.
Okay, all right. Okay.
Yeah, two remarks. I think if you ask origins what progress is, we discussed that at the conference in Milan a year or two ago. Progress, according to Origin, is the constant education of the soul towards moral and spiritual education towards perfection. That's probably not a definition you can use now, but we discussed exactly this concept. The other thing I would mention connects to what you said previously, that human nature, humanity do not change very much. There's now a growing discipline in evolutionary cultural evolution, which shows that human beings are very similar to what they were 1,000 or 2,000 or 10,000 years ago. So this is a very, very slow change. There's not much progress. So when we in humanities work with describing how it is to be human in the world, which I could say is a definition of what we do in humanities, then we describe an object which is not progressing much, or only progressing very slowly. So how can we then progress in our description? We can, of course, write new books, and that's important, like you say, Lorenzo. But I think also an aspect of it is to ask the same questions in new ways, in ways which are relevant to the contemporary society. So in some way it's always the same questions we ask because humans are the same. Then circumstances changes. We have more computers than we had before, but that's not very important seen in the long perspective. So we should ask the same questions in new ways. Simply that would be progress in our, and that's more circular than linear, I think.
Thank you. So to whom was the, please.
Thank you. Well, you surely have a progress in history research, but I'm not so sure whether we have a progress in philosophy itself. Do we have any progress from Plato, Aristotle, Stoicism and Plotinus? Well, I'm not sure of, to be honest. And it is not the only pattern we have in the history of European philosophy or European culture, the progress. We also have the pattern of Renaissance. And I think when we are not so sure what to do next, which seems to be the case nowadays, we can also go to this other pattern of the Renaissance. So to go back to the sources and to ask again the most important question asked in antiquity already.
Thank you. Yes.
Yep.
Yeah,
thank you very much. I mean, the question of color is very justified. What is progression in humanities? And I'm not sure that it is evident what it is, because every translation, every edition can be a regression. So I can remember when I was a student, we used in Euripides a special Oxford edition. But some years later, we had a new one in the Oxford edition series. So what is progression, what is regression? I think it depends on what is the understanding of history. The histories, for the scientists, the history is not very important. Paracelsus is not important for the medicine today, but Aristotle is very important for all of us in humanities or similar cases. What is history? We have a famous work by Hegel. History is the progression of consciousness of freedom. And I think that is right and can be the horizon of our thinking about what is progression.
Morgan, I think Morgan.
Morgan, did you have a question or an observation? No?
No.
Are there any other reflections on? Oh yes, absolutely.
I would challenge the chemist straight on, because I would say you are the progress of humanities, because the very notion of progress is basically secularized eschatology. And so, I mean, you are the proof of it. And I mean, there is no progress in humanities. And I'm a bit allergic to the notion of progress, because I mean, it was misused. Every agriculture cooperative, every second agriculture cooperative in my country was called Progress. Yeah. So, I mean, I would send the chemist to the hell with this question, because I think, is the progress of humanity the development of chemical weapons? I mean, is it the progress we are, So I wanted just to challenge a little bit that question, because we shouldn't be passively accepting, okay, we have to do some soul searching, maybe this is not enough progress in humanities. I mean, sorry for the bullshit.
Thank you. You wouldn't say that when you are interviewed for a job, but in principle, I think it's There was once a program on the BBC on the so-called virtual revolution, and they came to a relatively similar conclusion to what has been said here. That they say the virtual revolution does not change human nature, but amplifies it. So the problems are exactly the same as before. It can be used for wonderful and very good things, and for terrible and very bad things.
But also, there's an idea which the scientists have managed to claim for themselves, which is that everything's a new thing. It's supposed to be. In fact, most of these are optimization, not progress, and that is different. I think you can have any number of updates on an iPhone. The technology is the same. What you're doing is you're optimizing it to make it more user-friendly, to adapt new things, and I think that's a kind of general but you can optimize any field. There's all sorts of ways, you say, to optimize the way in which research in the humanities works, to make it more cost efficient, to make it more collaborative, all the rest of it. But this isn't progress, this is optimization, this is improving what you've already got to an optimal state.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or observations? Well, thank you for the stimulating discussion. Let's first thank all of our panelists. And thank you for your attention and for your contributions to the conversation.